This is the Opposition Leader Sussan Ley.
People safe across this beautiful country over summer. Can I thank them all very much indeed? Can I also take the opportunity to lend my voice to the request from Surf Lifesaving Australia to please swim between the flags. Australia's beaches and oceans are beautiful and friendly, but they can harbour risks. And the same can be said for our rivers inland. So please, please do not take risks when it comes to our waterways and our beaches. Yesterday I called the mayors of the shires in outback Queensland that are experiencing the current devastating floods. Capricornia, McKinley, Flinders, Cloncurry and Richmond. And outback Queensland is a long way from the southern states and the cities of Melbourne, Sydney and even Brisbane. But it is just heartbreaking to hear of the experiences of our landholders. And can I say there's nothing more heartbreaking as a farmer and a landholder to watch your livestock suffer. And our hearts go out to the farmers and the communities because they're very close communities and they're extraordinary in what they do, not just in delivering that sense of community and the spirit of Australia across this extraordinary landscape, but how they come together at a time like this. I'll be heading up there later this week with one thing only in mind, to say, what do you need? What can we do to help? And how can we best support you? Because with floods, it's been a long rain event going into this flood, and it's going to take a long time to come out of it. And I want to say to those communities, we won't forget. And when it feels as if the attention has moved on to other events, my team and I know more Australians every day who come to understand what is actually happening here will not forget, and it is vital that we all come together as a parliament and as leaders of this country to support those communities. I think there's been a bit of a break in the weather, but there's more rain forecast. It is indeed an extraordinary rain event. So very much have those individuals in mind today. Now, there's reports I hear today that Anthony Albanese might bring the parliament back ahead of Australia Day. I want to say this: every day that the parliament has not come back has been a day that it should have come back. So in fact, whenever it comes back, it won't be coming back early, it will be coming back late. The Prime Minister has missed the moment and missed the mark to lead the country through the aftermath of this awful terrorist event. It should have reconvened in the weeks after Bondi. We obviously stand ready whenever that date is. Yesterday we saw some really powerful contributions from our sporting legends, including the incredible Dawn Fraser, who really told it like it was. But to see so many step forward and demand a Commonwealth Royal Commission into the Bondi terror attack and to anti-Semitism in this country, I think the Prime Minister's got the unity that he called for. The unity from everyone, from business leaders, from employer groups more recently, from faith leaders, from previous Governors-General, from previous Defence and Intelligence chiefs, from former governors of the Reserve Bank, from leaders of corporate and business Australia, and millions of ordinary Australians are all calling for a Commonwealth Royal Commission. And when you look at that unity across so many sectors of society, you simply have to ask the question, why is the Prime Minister not listening? What is the Prime Minister hiding? And when you see the strength of purpose and the unity of message, you know the problem is not the argument. The problem is the Prime Minister. Every day, Anthony Albanese has, it seems, new excuses for refusing to act. First, he said that the Commonwealth Royal Commission would be too wide-ranging. Clearly, that makes no sense at all, given that anti-Semitism is a national crisis. And he said that Jewish Australians and their families could not cope with the truth. Extraordinarily insulting, and that excuse unravelled inside 24 hours. Then he said that unnamed actual experts had advised him against holding a Commonwealth Royal Commission, but he can't name any of them. So none of these excuses have stacked up, and none have been backed with evidence. Meanwhile, a Prime Minister who keeps changing his story, who misrepresents the facts and the expert advice, Australians are quite within their rights to ask, is this Prime Minister hiding behind a smokescreen of national security to avoid doing the one thing that the national interest demands, and increasingly Australians are demanding? Australians deserve honesty, they deserve answers, they deserve leadership. We in the Coalition will do everything in our power. We will leave no stone unturned to deliver this Commonwealth Royal Commission. That was the case in the days following the tragedy. It's the case every single day from now on. And if the Prime Minister has to be dragged kicking and screaming to call this Royal Commission, then so be it, because Australians deserve no less. And the question today still remains unanswered. What is the Prime Minister hiding? Happy to take questions.
Ms Ley, have you had any conversations with the Prime Minister about bringing Parliament back before Australia Day?
I've had some brief conversations with the Prime Minister from time to time. That's something that we do on a confidential basis, but I don't have a firm date from the Prime Minister. But I make my main point here, which is that the Parliament has not been recalled. There isn't a date, and the date should have been before Christmas.
Have you been briefed on the hate speech legislation that they intend to bring forward, and do you have what is your starting point in terms of how you approach that legislation?
I said in the days after Bondi that we would adopt a constructive approach with respect to legislation, and that remains the case today. Australians would expect us to work with the government and to be constructive. I haven't seen the legislation. I would expect to see it well in advance of any recall of Parliament and introduction into the Parliament, because this is really important and we have to get it right. What we also did as a coalition was, in the days before Christmas, provide a comprehensive package of some significant measures, including modernising our counter-terrorism laws, properly resourcing our security agencies, making Gillian Seagal's anti-Semitism report a statutory, making her role statutory and actually putting her report in legislation to really do the necessary work on anti-Semitism. And we've heard a lot of people very concerned about hate speech, as are we, and we would expect that the legislation that finally does come before the Parliament act in a way that does what we have insisted that it do, and this is that if you preach radical Islam, if you incite violence, if you glorify terrorism, and you are not an Australian citizen, you will be deported. And if you are an Australian citizen, you will be arrested. So we stand ready to work with the government, but we...
Follow up on that. Just given how, I guess, fraught both politically and also constitutionally legislation that touches on this area can be, is it possible to pass it in a week, in a fortnight? Would it require a parliamentary inquiry? Is it possible to get it through quickly?
It may be, and it depends what the legislation is, and I haven't seen it, and I await it with interest, and as I said, we're prepared to work with the government in a bipartisan manner, and we do have to make sure that it is fit for purpose. Now, people will make their own observations about political issues surrounding it. I think it's really simple. This is something that the national interest demands, and unless it addresses the hideous anti-Semitism that has risen unacceptably since October the 7th, then it won't be fit for purpose. And we have to be clear out as a country, and we have to acknowledge that the root of this hatred is radical Islam, and it needs to be addressed. And the government needs to take strong action. Now, whether it's difficult for them, that is a matter for them. But the lens that we will be looking at it through is the lens that every reasonable, fair-minded Australian will, which is that our social cohesion is fraying. This is not the country that we all know and love. It feels as if it has slipped away in terms of the events that we've seen and the lead up to Bondi, which is why a Commonwealth Royal Commission is so incredibly important. So yes, the legislative changes are, but we need that Royal Commission to find out what went wrong and what we need to do to course correct.
On Venezuela, we know you support the Trump administration's actions there, but do you believe they complied with international law? And how important is the question of international law when it comes to these situations?
Well, I'll point you to the statement that Senator Cash and I put out yesterday, but Maduro is an illegitimate president, and that has been made clear by Keir Starmer, by Macron and by many, many world leaders. And if I can just finish, and the human rights abuses, the crushing of freedom and democracy in that country makes it very obvious that Maduro's removal has been a good thing. And the coalition's position has always been for a transition to democracy in Venezuela, and dictators and despots should always face justice. Mike.
You said you'll take a constructive approach to legislative reform. Just wondering, on gun reforms, which the government aims to ram through, have you spoken to your national colleagues about a coalition approach to gun reform legislation? And within that, federal powers can touch on import restrictions. Do you have a position? Would you support potentially restricted gun imports for certain models and makes?
Well, Nationals colleagues form part of my shadow cabinet and shadow ministry, and of course our joint party room more broadly, so we will always be in conversations. I'm not going to be distracted by the Prime Minister's look over here with gun law reform. We'll have a sensible look at anything that comes forward, but changes to those laws originate from the states, and the states will have different approaches, and sometimes that they seem to have been modernising within the state's firearms registries that hasn't taken place. All of that belongs in state jurisdictions and will work its way through. Because quite honestly, I wouldn't expect to see those final decisions around what happens in the Commonwealth Parliament to support changes that the states have all agreed to, and that agreement hasn't yet been made for quite some months. But my main point is this. This is not the main game here. The main game is a Prime Minister who is looking for any possible excuse not to do the one thing that we need to do.
Would you support federal legislative changes on gun imports, for example?
My answer to questions about what we might support is always we will see what comes forward and make a decision then. Claire.
Anticipating your response to this then, specifically on a gun buyback scheme, which obviously would compensate people for changes made at a state level, is the coalition likely to principally support the establishment of a buyback scheme? And just picking up on what you said about it being not the main game, there are plenty of Australians who probably think governments are capable of dealing with hate speech, anti-Semitism and gun laws. Are you saying that the latter isn't as important?
I'm saying that we've got a Prime Minister who, in the days after the worst terrorist attack on Australian soil, did not do the thing that now every single Australian is calling out for, which is to call a Commonwealth Royal Commission. With respect to what comes forward, we will wait and see what comes forward. I haven't been briefed as the opposition leader on anything in that space at all, and my expectation is it's quite some time away. But let's not forget that the people who were targeted on December the 14th were targeted because of their identity, of their faith, of the fact that they are Australians with Jewish faith. And if somebody has hate in their heart and Jewish hatred in their heart, they will find a weapon. Hence you see bollards going up in our major cities, just here and overseas, to stop that weapon being a car or a knife or some other crazy initiative. So it is important that we address the root cause here. If we need to look at gun laws and change something, as the states have said, that's a matter for them and a matter that we would, of course, consider with any consequential, necessary federal legislation. But I will not be distracted from what the Prime Minister is doing here on this issue.
Ms Ley, can I just ask, do you think that Josh Frydenberg would be a good addition to the federal parliament, and have you had any discussions with him?
Always.
Or with the party
Always.
about him running in the next election?
always welcome Josh, not just stepping up in the extraordinary way he has following the Bondi terror attack, but for somebody of his character and his ability and his talents and his standing in the community, yes, he was a great loss to the Parliament and would be a great addition to the Parliament. And I'm very sad that we don't have a Liberal member for Kooyong, and we'll be working very hard to restore the balance of Liberal membership in that part of Melbourne. And I'm sad that I lost so many great colleagues, not just in that election. Okay, Josh.
The government's 3-day guarantee for childcare begins today. Do you support the Prime Minister's goal of universal early childhood education?
We have a lot of questions about this, and the main question we have today is, what does this mean in practice? So it sounds good. It suggests to everybody that there's access to free childcare. Clearly that's not the case, that there's at least 3 days for every family. Well, you can find families in almost every single postcode that can't get a place for 1 day, let alone 3. The other concern we have is that it removes the activity test. And what that means is that people who are working or studying no longer have priority. And we've always believed that those families should have priority in childcare. The other criticism, and like most government policies, there's quite a lot of criticism with this, is that it's the government saying, this is what we think your childcare model needs to look like. We're calling it universal childcare. Here it is. Now just everyone say thank you because it's a really good thing. Well, it's not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily work for every family in every situation, whether it be rural and regional, whether you be suburban, whether you have to travel a long distance to even get childcare in the first place. So this is a government out of touch with the community, not telling us how much this will cost. Remember, we've got a government spending $50,000 a minute on the interest on the debt, and we've got families who are staring down the barrel of interest rate rises soon. Now, with the cost of living crisis,
That was Opposition Leader Sussan Ley there, very much ramping up her calls for a federal royal commission following the Bondi tragedy, as we see not only Australian sporting legends but also members of the crossbench, including several Teal MPs, back a need for a royal commission. She said the Prime Minister is looking for any excuse not to hold one. Now, she's also been asked about the recalling of Parliament early as a possibility and whether she supports the government's gun buyback scheme and reforms, suggesting this is not the main game, and I haven't been briefed on that, praising former Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg for standing up for the Jewish community after Bondi.